Hey, Josh from Bildr here. In this video, we're going to continue our tour of the Done template. Done is a task, team, and project management template available to all users of Bildr, and it's going to give you a lot of the base level tools, design structure, as well as data structure you need to replicate, copy, or just learn a little bit more about how to create your own application from scratch in Bildr. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about how we're doing the things that we are. So as you can see here, I've got my dashboard pulled up. And I have a list of my tasks and project as the user that's logged in. I have a team tasks and projects row that lets me view all of the statuses for the entire team. Then I've also got the ability to view my specific tasks, my specific projects I'm involved with, as well as a list of the teams that I'm on. We've set up this page in particular is to show you how to do complex data relationships and really complex filtering to get to very specific values and outcomes. Something that you'll hear as we talk about this template and in general is one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many data relationships. And just on this page alone, we've got examples of each one and using each relationship to go find a specific data point or data information, like a count here, from that relationship collection. So let's go ahead and start exploring how this dashboard actually works. I'm in the Bildr Studio now. You can see I've got my dashboard page right here, and you can see the different categories that all exist in the dashboard page we just came from. If I click on this page, if I look through the element tree, I'm going to see some divs for 3 columns, which I can see those columns appear, one column for each of these specific cards that you see. Beneath this, I actually have a single column of my different specific repeating list fields, like a list of the actual tasks that I have that week, a list of projects for the user who's logged in that they have tasks assigned to, and then also a list of teams that the user that's logged in also can see. And so there's a couple important mechanisms at play here. First, we know we need to be able to get all the data about this particular company and their task, projects, and teams. We also need to then be able to filter those things for all of the teams or just the individual users. And so it's really important that we know how to go about filtering the data to get that and make it happen. Let's jump to our page load to start this process. So if I go to page load, one little thing that you'll see is I set this variable skip load of user page on task, and that variable value is set to yes. I do that because we recycle the same component over and over again in a lot of different spots, specifically our task row. And on this row, we have a component designed to show the picture and the name of the person assigned to the task. And to help show using the same component in different spots with slightly different states, I wanted to show you how to do that. And so on our dashboard, I just create a variable that is basically saying, hey, don't load that person's page, because then they don't see just their own name and their own picture over and over again. That might be good or that might be bad. It's just a preference, and really I'm using it to show you how it works. Because then on this page, whenever I load each one of these up, I actually check, does the parent page, so whatever page that this happens to be on at that moment, does the parent use this variable and is it equal to yes? Because I do this in actually a couple different spots. I do it on my personal individuals task page, and I do it on the dashboard because it's just that individual viewing their own set of tasks. And so that's why we have that variable set on the dashboard as soon as we load it and how it's used throughout the application. So let's go to page binding now. Now, page binding, as we know, is a single action in Bildr by default, data run bindings, that anytime there's data on a page bound to a specific element, it does all the work to make that happen. On this page, we actually don't use data bindings at all. I just keep it here to show where it lived originally before I edited it. So let's dive into the first step here that we do have before this. We have this precache data here, and there's a few things that we're doing. The first thing is we're setting a variable called all projects, and we're setting it from the projects collection, and we're just getting all of the fields. So fairly straightforward here, no filters. It's just a completely open-ended get without any sort of limits. Quick reminder, the reason that we don't have to do any filters here is because our data collections are set up and permissioned so that only users who are invited to specific data records are able to request them. Bildr's baked it all into the data security structure in your data collection, so you're just requesting all the projects for the user and only the correct information will come. So as you can see here, we set the variable for all of our projects, we set a variable for all of our tasks, we set another variable for all of the statuses, and then we do an additional manipulation of our statuses where we actually filter all of our statuses and create an additional variable that we end up calling our openStatuses. Here, we're choosing a field that exists inside of this variable. So we know because we just set this all statuses directly from the task and project status collection, we can just go from a field, task and project statuses from that collection, and choose the completed status field. It's basically the same as if we were pulling it directly from the data collection. You could just choose to do this from the data collection. However, just wanting to show you another way to manipulate data if you're pulling it from a variable and doing it step by step, as opposed to always from a data collection structure. And so again, in this case, we've got our all statuses. We've chosen the field value in that variable to say, if our completed status does not equal check mark, and that's the same as any Boolean variable, it's a 1 or a 0. 1 is yes, 0 is no. But if it doesn't equal check mark, which is what we have set up in our data collection, then we want it to be included. If it were to say equals, we would be getting the opposite side of it. So by does not equal 1, we're guaranteeing we're going to get everything that doesn't equal 1. So we've got all of the bits and pieces of information that we need here to start doing the next step as we go. So that was step 1 of our page binding. Next, we have our set Unix timestamps here. If you don't know, a Unix timestamp is basically a series of numbers that indicate a specific, I think down to the millisecond time since 1970 and on. So the first thing that we do is we set the variable Unix timestamp. We get that from a system. So we have these input types in Bildr here. If you go to advanced, you can go to system, and there's all sorts of values in system, from the browser that they're on, the computer that they're on, the size, the screen. But in this case, we're just getting the full date time from the current user. And then we are also giving that a path of date to Unix timestamp. Paths are built off JavaScript, which is basically just big complex sets of code that have been reduced to very small functions inside of JavaScript. So date to Unix timestamp actually represents this really big complicated thing that JavaScript does to understand what date is being given to it and then rearrange it and understand what Unix timestamp represents that date. So we're able to just say date to Unix timestamp and we don't have to worry about it. Once I have the exact Unix timestamp from this moment in time for the end user, I then am setting Unix timestamp again, but I'm using our math function here. So in our input math, I'm using some math where I take the value that's currently in that variable and I subtract 12 times 60 times 60. In this case, what I've chosen to do is just subtract out 1 day of time from the total Unix timestamp that I got. Basically so that if it's the afternoon, but there was a task that was due this morning, but it didn't have a timestamp, it's not going to appear as overdue until the next day. So this logic is resetting the Unix timestamp value back a day so that I can have a full day and use today as the calendar day as an easier cutoff as opposed to the exact moment. Right after this with Unix timestamp is we set a variable called Unix timestamp 7 days. And in this case is we're just adding 7 days to our Unix timestamp so that we can then have a range of time for tasks that are due in the next 7 days. And specifically, we do this because we want to show a my task this week section. And so this gives us the range that we'll use later on to reference the range of time between this moment here and the moment in 7 days from this moment. Now let's start setting the dashboard numbers for the team. And we'll start with set the number of open tasks for the team. The best way to think about any sort of data filtering, whether you're building an advanced filters with a single page and a grid that you've put a bunch of data in, and you want to allow anyone to filter as many filters as they want, you could have dozens. Or even if you're just trying to manipulate data to then display it in a certain way, the most important thing is you're going to start with the full data set of what you're trying to eventually display. And each step along the way, you want to remove the data from it that is not in the filter that you want to survive and display at the end. So if you're ever wondering, how do I go get this data and display this version of it? Always start with the biggest one and then just think about, how can I start to remove parts of this data or filter specific parts of it down with the specific selections that I need. And so that's what we're doing in all of these next, say, like 10 workflows here. So we start with our all task workflow. All the tasks for our company are in this variable. Awesome. We're going to try to filter this, and we're going to filter it by the status ID field of those tasks. So that's the value from the initial set that we're going to match, so that if it matches, it'll survive and go to the next step. If it doesn't, it's going to get kicked out and deleted. The next thing we're doing is filtering the data set that we're going to use to see if it matches. It's a really important principle of filtering data set by another data set, or filtering your data set by a single value. A single value means one individual value could be a match, and if that value does not match the individual value, it's kicked out. When we do filter data set by data set, what we're saying is I have a range of 5 values that all could be true, and I want my initial data, if it matches any of those 5 values, I want it to survive to the next step. And so in this case, we have all of our tasks, and I have any number of statuses, if you recall from step 1, that could mean this is an open task. It's not completed, it's live. And that's a data point that we have in our status collection so that it indicates if that status is open or not. So what we're doing is saying, if the status of a task in our status ID relationship field on our tasks, if it matches any of the IDs from the statuses inside of our openStatuses variable, I want it to survive. And I have a filter type of keeping my only matches. And then it's going to be dropped into a new variable called openTeamTasks. So all tasks still exists, but the filtered version of it from this step and this action is now stored in openTeamTasks. The other important thing that you'll see, and you'll want to use at different times, is this ignore empty filter array. And it's going to vary depending on the situation. But the important principle to know is when this is in a no position, it means that, let's say for some reason openStatuses was empty. You deleted all of the statuses that meant that it was still open, and all of the statuses were closed tasks. Well, this would be an empty filter set. And in this case, if it's empty, we don't want any of our tasks to survive because they don't match the openStatuses. In other situations, you may decide in filtering, hey, if nothing is going to get filtered out, I want to just ignore the empty filter array. And basically what it does, if it's an empty filter array or an empty data set as your filtered data set, it just skips this process and all of the values here survive until the next one. And so that's the basic thing that happens here. And it's use case specific when you do or don't want to use that. Now that I have my filtered statuses in my openTeamTasks variable here, with a wait before my next step, I'm going to set an element value. I've chosen specifically the element value underneath my open task. So if we click here, we've got a little spot for all of our numbers in each of our cards. So we're actually setting the number in the open task card for our teams from the openTeamTasks variable that we just got. And we're using another path called length. Length counts the number of records in a subset of data. It's just going to give me the exact number of records that exist inside of this variable. It's not going to change that variable at all. It's just going to count the number of records. If this was a spreadsheet, it would just be the number of rows with values in them. And it's going to give me that number. And in this case, I've chosen to set that number into an element on the page. So that's what we're doing with our set number of open tasks for the entire team. As you would probably guess, the next couple tasks are very similar. For our overdue tasks, we're now manipulating our open team task that we just set a little bit further. Because now I don't just care if it's open, I care if it's overdue. And so what I want to do is I want to compare the Unix timestamp of the due date of the task on the task record itself with the Unix timestamp I set already earlier in this flow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my full set of data that I know is valid and true for what I want to display. And I'm going to start figuring out how do I filter out the information from it that I don't want, or target the information that I do. So in this case, we're doing our filter data set by a single value. And the good part about single values is we also get additional things. So it's not just, does it match? It's, is it less than or equal to? Does it equal or is it not equal? Does it contain? So there's different things that we can filter here because we're just comparing to one value instead of a range of do they match outcomes. So I've got my open team tasks. I'm going to choose my starting field as the Unix timestamp due date from my task collection. All of that information is stored in my variable here for each individual task. And what I want to compare it to is this timestamp less than the Unix timestamp that I captured as soon as I loaded the page. Because if that is the case, the Unix timestamp is always increasing over time as time goes on. If the timestamp of the due date is less than the current timestamp that I have, I know it's overdue. So I'm displaying tasks that are overdue based off of that comparison. And remember, we've already filtered out the closed tasks. So these are only tasks that are open and previous to this Unix timestamp, meaning they're overdue. And so we have the same exact information here. And then we're going to set the surviving task records into a new variable called overdue tasks for team. And in the very next one, we're going to set the length of it into the overdue tasks card right here. So very similar process. We just built on the first step of filtering open tasks from all tasks to also then filter it for tasks that are overdue by looking at the date that they were due. The final setting of the numbers for the team step is setting number of open projects for the team. This is very similar to our open task step. We're simply starting with all of our projects in that variable. We're going to use the project status on that record to compare against the same openStatuses variable that we have stored. And we're going to, again, select the ID from those statuses as the record that is going to be compared. And we're only going to keep our matches. So I only want my projects where their statuses are open, and then those are the ones I'm going to end up displaying. So that's what's occurring right here. And I'm going to have my variable name open projects for team. I'm going to go ahead and set my next element from my open projects team value. And I'm going to count it with the length so that I get the number and not the actual content itself. So that's what's happening to set our team tasks and projects numbers that you see right here. I'm going to go ahead and just refresh our dashboard so that you can see this. And you can see we've got 4 open tasks, 1 overdue task, and 3 open projects. This is different than my personal ones since these are team ones. So let's go ahead and see team tasks. We can see we've got 4 open tasks. Tasks that are open are these white and not crossed out. And then we know 1 task is overdue right here. And that's why it's showing on our dashboard as 1 overdue task. So let's go ahead and jump over to setting dashboard for the current user. As you might have guessed, it's a very similar process. We've actually already got a lot of the important information that we need. We basically need to add this filter of, let's not just look at the whole company, let's look at the current user's information. So we've already taken a big layer out of data, and we're just going to keep manipulating that and reusing the variables that we just set previously. We're going to start with our open team task variable that we set in the previous group. We're going to now filter by a field in those tasks for the assigned to user ID. And what we're looking for is, does that user ID equal the ID from the current user info? So current user info looks at the authenticated user in the system and says, here's the info about the user that is logged in coming from the user identity collection. And if the ID is equal to that, okay, we want it to go ahead and persist. And we're going to set it in the variable current user open tasks. And we're going to follow our same process to take that variable, use the length path to put that in our open tasks right there. And the next step is going to be similar as well. So we've got our overdue tasks. We're doing the same thing where we grab our current user open tasks, we add the next layer of filtering that we're actually going to look for the Unix timestamp. Again, compare it against the Unix timestamp that we set on the page already, give it its own variable name, and then set the value for it from the length of the number of tasks in this group. Finally, we are going to set the number of open projects for the current logged in user. To do this, we have to get a little bit creative because while it looks like a user currently in the system is assigned to a project, the user's relationship with the project is actually through their relationship with tasks that are then also related to a project. And so we've got a couple data collections away. It's not this user is on this project, it's this user is on this task is on this project. So the relationship is a little bit further. Now we've already started the process of creating some of these additional versions of data that lets us do this really quickly. So let's go ahead and take a look. We have first our variable open projects team. We created that earlier on in this entire flow as we load the page. So we have that ready to go. That's all the projects that have a status of open across the whole team. So we're going to get the starting dataset field, and we're going to use the ID field from our projects collection that are stored here. That's what we're going to look to compare the next dataset. The next dataset we want to use is our current user's open tasks. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at, for the current user that's logged in, and for the current tasks that they have as open, I want to look at that list and I want to pull out all of the project IDs that those tasks are assigned to. And what I'm able to do then is I'm able to say of all of the projects that exist in the whole account, how many match the IDs that came out of this task collection. And this task collection was already filtered by the user. So I'm able to see the projects that my user is assigned to via the tasks that they are assigned to with this filter. From there, I'm doing the same thing. I'm keeping the matches. I am naming it to a new variable, and I'm setting that variable with the path of length into the element on the page right here. So through this systematic data manipulation, starting from the beginning of getting all the data and then taking out the important data at each step of the way, I'm able to get to the important information that I need to be able to display to our users. The next thing we want to do is actually show the specific records, the tasks, the projects, and the teams that our user is actually on. So let's go to number 6 in our list here of set repeating list elements for the user. And we're going to start with setting the current user tasks for the week. In this case, we're going to start with going back to the task collection, and we're going to filter it by the assigned to user ID. We could do this with an additional step if we wanted to from the all task collection, but because we are filtering this whole data set by another data set inside of one action, it just takes out an action that we have to manage. Certainly, you could choose to have this from the all tasks filter by the current user and then do this next step. We've just combined it here. So we're going back to our task collection. We're getting all the fields, and we're making sure the assigned to user ID is the current user that's logged in and their ID. So this is all the tasks that user has from all time. Great. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare that set of data based off its Unix timestamp due date. And what we're going to look for now is it greater than or equal to the current Unix timestamp? So meaning, is it after the Unix timestamp that we have set for today? And if it is, go ahead and let that record survive and be put into this variable name right here. And then immediately after that, with a wait, we're going to take that variable that we just set and manipulate it again. So we're going to the variable as our data set. We're using the exact same data set filter field, the Unix timestamp. But now we're looking at, instead, we want it to be less than or equal to the Unix timestamp 7 days. That's 7 days from the moment that we set as today. And so that tells us here are the tasks that are due in the next week for this user. And so it's ultimately been reduced to a specific list for this exact user for this exact upcoming week. We go ahead and set it into an element, and we've chosen our task for week on the page, so it's able to display on the page right here. So that's why we're going to see these two tasks. There are two open tasks for the user, but since one is overdue, that overdue one no longer actually slots into this rule of tasks for this week. The last important thing to note is that I am also toggling on this thing called trigger change event. You can do this anytime you set an element value. You can trigger a change event on that element to occur when that happens. And the reason that I have turned this on here is because I'm actually wanting to do a quick logic check to see how many tasks are there so that I can display a message that's appropriate. So I'll jump to that here in a moment. But what I also want to show is I'm also hiding this div for loading. So loading your tasks, just a mini message telling the user, hey, it might take 2 or 3 seconds when the page loads. So if you see loading your task, you just know that's being loaded. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. Now that I know that that's done, I'm going to go jump over to this repeating list and show you that the change event tied to this repeating list that I just set is going to check the actual length of the data. You could actually do value or data, FYI here. For repeating list elements, they are essentially the same. But we're going to look at the length of the data in the repeating list. A repeating list in Bildr is an array of data. It's the same as these variables that we've talked about. It's just every item in that variable has been given a page to display on the screen. It's fundamentally the exact same thing. And so we're going to count the length of it with the same length path. If it's equal to 0, I know that they have no task assigned to them. So I have a function that says set state empty to-do list, where I show this hidden message that says there's no task this week, take a break. And this is normally hidden, and it gets shown if the task field is empty. On the opposite side of that, if it's not empty, we're going to go ahead and say set state show the weekly to-do list. And although this is technically redundant in a lot of cases, we're going to show the repeating list element and hide the specific empty task div that has the message for no task due, because one of the things that we have set up on the page is data listeners that will automatically refresh the page. So if this logic needs to rerun, I want to make sure I'm showing and hiding the messages appropriately for every time there's a change on that repeating list. That same logic happens with our project tasks and teams assigned that I'll show you in a second, but won't walk through the logic because it's the exact same logic for showing or hiding the specific elements related to these two other categories that we're loading in here. So let's go ahead and show those next two steps. To show all of the projects our user is active in, we're going to start with our open projects team variable. This is all the projects that are open for the team. And we're also going to filter by the ID field from the project. So we're going to find the IDs of the projects that we want to display. And in this case, we're going to go back to our task data collection instead of our filtered tasks for one specific reason. And that's because we want to make sure that all of these tasks are assigned to our current logged in user. The only difference between what we're doing here and what we did above is I don't care if the individual task itself is open or closed. In this case, I want my user to see all of the projects that they're involved with. Even if their tasks are completed, I want them to see the status of a project that they're involved with. And so I'm not reusing our filter here for open tasks for the user. I'm going back to the full task data collection and getting every single task that user is assigned. And if they are assigned a task that is also assigned to a project through that relationship field, we're going to go ahead and keep those matches and set those projects that survive from the initial filter data set here. Through that filtering process, where the projects that survive are going to be displayed in our open projects repeating list right here, and one row will be displayed for every project that gets through. And again, we trigger the change event and we hide the loading information. The final thing that we do is simply setting the teams that our current user is connected to. And so our teams and user relationship collection is a standard many-to-many scenario. We have the teams collection, we have the users collection, and a user can be on many teams, and a team can have many users. So there's many opportunities on both sides. And the way to do a many-to-many data relationship is you have a middle relationship collection that lets you create a connection between those records. So what we've done here is We start with our teams collection because that's what we want to display. That's the big set of data that we are trying to start with everything and filter where we can to then display that information at the end. And so we're starting with our teams data set, and we're going to get all of the teams available to us right here. We're going to say we're filtering by the ID of the team records. And the next data set that we're going to use to filter in specific teams, we are going to go ahead and look at our team's user relationship record collection. We're going to only return our teams field. We could return all of them. In small data sets, this is really irrelevant. If you work with like hundreds of thousands of records, you might want to get more selective about what data you bring over just to make the network call smaller. So the only filter we're going to do is on the user part of that relationship, what records is the current user there for? And if the current user is there with their ID, those are the records where the team ID exists under the team field in the team's users relationship collection. For me to say, these are the IDs that I want to survive from my total teams collection. And then that's the data I'm going to ultimately set into our repeating list element for teams assigned to the specific user that is logged in. And I set it into the element right here. I run the change event, I hide the loading, and it allows me to display the teams that our user is assigned to whenever they load this page. And so just a final demo to show you this kind of simple dashboard with numbers displaying relevant information about, hey, here's how the project's going, here's how the teams are going, here are the things that I'm responsible for. I hope this was helpful. Was it? Do you have questions? Let us know in the comments. Jump into Discord and let us know if you have any additional questions for your projects. Hopefully some of this representation of relationship data records helps you understand how to go get records from different data collections in your system, or even initially set up your own relationship collections so that you can scale databases as big as you want to go, but keep that really efficient, simple process of going to pinpoint and target specific data when you want.